It's very difficult to know what's going to happen once the pandemic ends. It's almost impossible to know. This pandemic is going to really change in the way in which not only global trade takes place, but also how countries relate to each other. In other words, it's going to change trade and travel, two essential parts of the globalized economy. So we don't really know what is going to happen after this. We do know that the United States has attempted to shift the global supply chain so that there's less international reliance on China. This is to further weaken China. It's not going to be possible to do this. You can't move factories that are now in Hubei province, China, to Tamil Nadu in India. And the reason you can't do this is in India, unlike China, which is a socialist country, the working class in India is got bad nutrition, is underfed, much thinner, is often susceptible to ordinary diseases, and therefore is not as productive a workforce as the Chinese workforce, which is better fed, less susceptible to disease, and literate. So you can't so easily say, let's move factories from China to India or move factories from China to Vietnam or whatever. It's not going to be possible, but they're trying to do it. So what I would say is there's going to be an attempt led by the United States, but joined by some or several European countries to break their links with China to try to isolate China. What they will not be able to do, however, is make China isolated from the rest of the world. And this is very significant. Over the course of the last 15 to 20 years, China has built very intimate, important ties with South America, with Africa, with most of Asia through the Belt and Road Initiative. It's going to be difficult to isolate China. China is a major economy in the world. It plays a very significant role in the reproduction of people's lives around the world. So I don't think it's going to be possible to isolate China. But I still think they're going to try, and that's what could lead to a serious conflict for which I am very worried. The problem is China doesn't manufacture only for its own market. If China mainly manufactured for its own market, then it would have an advantage. But because global trade volumes have collapsed by about 1/3, that's an enormous collapse on global trade volumes. China is not able to export its goods around the world. And because of that, you're going to see a crisis of overcapacity. There will be factories which can produce 3-4 times the amount that they're producing now, but they'll have to slow down on production in order not to get goods stuck at the ports, because they can't move anywhere. As a consequence of that, Chinese productivity is going to suffer. They're going to have to slow down, and therefore goods will be more expensive, and so on and so forth. There is an advantage. They have got their factories going again. The problem is China has to actually think very long and hard whether it wants to increase its domestic market, and perhaps, and this is what they have been doing, increase the market that it is built along the Belt and Road. It's still not clear how the Belt and Road is going to recover from COVID-19. The Belt and Road is to go from territorial China all the way out to Italy, down into Africa, down into the Middle East, and so on. It's still not clear when goods will be able to move easily through this part of the world. So until that is clear, the fact that China is back online is not itself enough of an indication of what will happen. We are in a very dangerous time. The United States, which has for decades enjoyed basically power without limits, is finding that the Chinese have developed not military power, let's not confuse things, not even just economic power, but they've actually developed scientific and technological power. In other words, when you look at the 5G, the ability of the Chinese to develop, the Internet of all things, maybe hydrogen power, things like this, next generation of energy. This is a great threat to the United States in their long-term view. So they've been trying for a long time to prevent China from breaking through and having this scientific and technological power. Lots of anti-China and very war-like statements have been coming before Corona. Even the trade war, which Donald Trump prosecuted against China, they used a lot of military language. United States has developed something called the Indo-Pacific Partnership with Australia, Japan, and India in an attempt to encircle China. So this predates the coronavirus, this attempt to, put China back in its borders, put China in its place. You combine this with some of the new weapons that the US has developed, particularly the hypersonic cruise missile, which, under an hour can be shot from the United States. In under 1 hour, it can flatten a city anywhere. It goes at 5 times the speed of sound. You've got this increasing anxiety in America about the loss of technological and scientific power. You have the increased rhetorical language against China through the trade war, now COVID-19, and you link that with these new weapon systems for which there is no real defense. This is a very dangerous place we're in now. In 2020, you don't have a liquidity problem. Banks are actually sitting on a lot of cash. The problem you face is an employment crisis. You see, you've said there's a great lockdown. Something like 2.7 billion people were out of work very quickly in the lockdown. It's an enormous number. It's maybe half the world's workforce suddenly out of an occupation, out of getting a livelihood. Most people in the world don't have the savings to last more than a week to 10 days. Not more than that. If they have to pay rent, they're finished. They don't have that kind of money sitting around. Most people in the world. So if you say a lockdown for 2 weeks, you've essentially condemned the majority of the people in the planet to starvation. It's very interesting. This was a kind of imposed general strike. Because the first time so much labor was withdrawn from the capitalist system and the system collapsed, which proves that the capitalist system relies on the labor, not just on ideas or on capital. It's labor that creates value. The moment you took people out of the equation, the system shut down. So how to save the system? Money should have been raised immediately as relief for the people because it's an employment crisis. The main money should go towards feeding people, giving people the means to survive the lockdown and so on. Not to give money to the banks and companies because they are often sitting on cash. If not in their legal accounts, they are sitting on it in their offshore accounts. They don't need more money. If you give companies more money, they're not going to go out and hire people because for at least 2 weeks, 1 month, nobody can be hired. We're in a lockdown. So rather than rationally deal with the pandemic crisis, which is not a liquidity crisis, it's an employment crisis. Rather than deal with it for what it is, they used the same formula from 10 years ago and, as is typical, just gave money to the rich. This is really ridiculous. Well, when you compare the United States of America, one of the richest countries in the world per capita, with Vietnam, one of the poor countries of the world, the comparison is stunning. In Vietnam, which has about 1,000-kilometer border with China, there have been no fatalities. Nobody has died from COVID-19. The reason nobody has died is for all Vietnam's problems, they maintained a public health system. They have a government that believes in science. And for all these reasons, when COVID-19, when the stories came from China in January of 2020, the government of Vietnam went into action. And their public health institutions went and monitored the health of people, did temperature checks and so on. A country like India, country like Brazil, United States, Italy, United Kingdom, any of these capitalistic countries, over the last 10 years at least, if not longer, they've been destroying public health systems. They've not been paying enough to nurses and doctors. They've been smashing their unions. They've essentially been promoting the privatization of medicine. Medicine and healthcare should never be for profit. Medicine and healthcare are essential social services. They should be held in the social sector. They should never be for profit in any system. Not just never in a socialist system, obviously, but not even in a capitalist. It's cruel to have money being made of the health of people. So if you destroy your healthcare infrastructure, if you have a government that doesn't believe in science, Mr. Bolsonaro doesn't seem to believe in science. Mr. Narendra Modi in India doesn't believe in science. Donald Trump doesn't believe in science. You don't believe in science on the one hand, and you don't have a public health system, then you are going to have a wreckage when a pandemic appears. And that's what happened. The reason Italy is able to spend money is because they are able to borrow money from various commercial lenders and multilateral lenders to help their populations, because they don't want the labor force to die. The reason a country like Argentina, in the middle of this crisis, is going to once again have to pay the creditors money it doesn't have is because they cannot so easily find lenders. Brazil is not going to be able to spend much money. It cannot find lenders. That's the nature of imperialism, that even though Italy is in poor economic state, it can still find lenders. Now, Italy, like Argentina, is facing a problem within Europe because Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, etc., don't want to help Italy. They would prefer Italy suffer. So there are these extraordinary cruelties that are they are right in front of our face when it comes to the way in which working people are suffering. Half the world's population is right now in a condition of hunger. This is not an exaggeration. This is based on United Nations numbers. 1 in 2 people on the planet Earth right now is in a condition of hunger. We have 21st century dictatorships already in place. And there are 2 kinds of 21st century dictatorships. The first is, to make a coup in the 21st century, you don't need tanks. You just need banks. Because there is a kind of dictatorship of finance. If a country doesn't behave itself, the creditors will punish you. The International Monetary Fund will come and punish you. These pressures of finance are enough to bring a country in line. And we've seen this over and over again. Democratically elected governments basically have to fall to their knees and pray to the bankers. This happened to Greece. Greece was going through financial crisis. The Syriza government came. They said, no, we have an alternative. We don't want to have austerity. And the bankers said, you will do austerity. And they went to their knees and said, we'll do austerity. That was a coup d'etat. That was not anything other than a coup d'etat. But it's not like a 19th or 20th century coup d'etat. You don't need tanks on the street. The bankers told you, do this or we're going to close the country down. That's a coup d'etat. That's a dictatorship of finance capital. That's one kind. The second kind of dictatorship we have today, we already have it. That's what I'm trying to say, is the dictatorship that maintains democracy. You see, what you got in Honduras and in Bolivia was a coup d'etat which came in the name of democracy. Evo Morales was overthrown in a coup d'etat. The military came and told him, you have to leave. But no, the media, especially in the West, was saying it's not a coup d'etat. And by the way, not just the Western media. The media in Latin America was saying it's not a coup d'etat. It was Morales who was anti-democratic. The coup is democratic. Similarly, in Honduras in 2009, Zelaya is undemocratic. The coup is bringing in democracy. See, they are using instruments of dictatorship surrounded by the language of democracy. The removal of Dilma from the presidency of Brazil was an act of a coup d'etat. It's what is known as lawfare. So you maintain the facade of democracy, but you install essentially dictatorial governments. In India and the United States, money power determines the election. So you continue to have elections, but so much money is spent, hundreds of millions of US dollars spent in an election. You spend so much money in an election, it's no longer democratic. It's in name democratic. It's the dictatorship of money power. So I actually don't feel like there's going to be any embarrassment around the world with the hard right coming to power. You see, what the difference is, they're not embarrassed by these dictatorships. They're embarrassed by the fact that they say very ridiculous things. You see, it's the kind of statements that Bolsonaro makes or Modi makes that's embarrassing to people. But there's a contradiction. You need Modi to make these statements, otherwise he can't build legitimacy inside the country among the population that supports him. He has to be ridiculous to build legitimacy among them, but these ridiculous statements are embarrassing for the big bourgeoisie. The big elites in Sao Paulo don't want the president of Brazil to be a climate denier in public. They would like the policies to be such that they can make money exploiting the Amazon. But they don't want him to make stupid statements about, anti-gay statements and things like that. The thing is, he can't be in power without the anti-gay statements. That's the contradiction. So you have democracy, but it's a shell of democracy. It's a Potemkin village of democracy. It's a democracy without democracy. I think what has happened is that the form of bourgeois government that has been there for about 30 odd years, 40 years maybe, has exhausted itself. And that was the bourgeois government that managed globalization around the world. These were governments that allowed banks to have a great deal of power, that didn't fight to capture tax revenue. They allowed tax. Right now, about $32 trillion is sitting in tax havens. They allowed this money to go out. They were not able to, in a sense, politically put pressure on the ruling classes and the capitalist bloc. So this bourgeois order was, let the capitalists grow, let inequality rise. Eventually, things may become better, and they turned to working people and said, the solution for you, friends, is you should all become entrepreneurs. You should all get education. You should all start a business. If a young person wants to do well, they need to just design an app, and then they'll become, millionaires. And they sold these lies to people. When the financial crisis happened in 2009, it became clear that their model, their project, this neoliberal bourgeois model was no longer adequate to people's imagination. It was a lie. The left not being able to push an agenda at the time opened the door for the hard right to come back. And the hard right is always a nightmare from the past. You see, in Brazil, for instance, the coup d'etat of 1964 brought in a process of deep anti-communist hatreds inside the country, the killing of communists, the killing of left-wingers, which Brazil essentially pioneers around South America. Operation Condor, for instance, that takes place with the juntas of the Southern Cone in Argentina, in Chile, and so on. They took their lessons from the Brazilian generals. This deep anti-communist attitude in country, this deep conservatism was inculcated. It was put into Brazilian society. And when the neoliberals kind of agenda collapses, these people arrive.
Contra o comunismo, pela nossa liberdade, pela memória do coronel Carlos Alberto Brilhante Ustra, o pavor de Dilma Rousseff.
And so Bolsonaro, when he casts his vote against Dilma, he doesn't just cast his vote, he casts his vote in honor of her torturer, going back to the regime of anti-communist, hateful, toxic, misogynistic. They bring all the hate of the past to bear, giving them strength and saying, listen, I am strong, I am the strong man, I like to play with guns, I will take the economy, I will grab it by the throat, I will squeeze the throat, and it will cough out jobs for you. You see, these people don't have an economic agenda, but they talk tough, they have good rhetoric, they appeal to a certain section of the public. That's how they came all around the world. Modi has no agenda for suffering in India. Half the Indian population is starving on any good day. He has no agenda. They sent hundreds of millions of people in the pandemic to walk home. No agenda for them, no care. But he'll come on television and he'll say, I'm with you. I'm the only one with you. I am the tough guy. I have a 56-inch chest. That's what he says. So there's a kind of machismo in their leadership. It's machismo, not rationality. And machismo doesn't actually have an agenda. So the only thing they can say is they point fingers at minorities, let's say in India, Muslims, or LGBTQ or women and so on. They point fingers and say these people are the problem. If we can purge them from society, then we'll have a good culture. I think this is very dangerous because it's genocidal thinking. And that's another reason why the left has to be determined. Sensitive people have to, in a determined way, build the left in order to outflank this genocidal kind of politics, which is taking us further and deeper into barbarism. The problem for the left is that the conditions for revolutionary movement are very much in existence. We have the correct conditions. We are just not strong as an organized movement. People can rise up, but who is going to drive the revolutionary process forward? For that, you need a political organization of some strength and will. And in many countries, the left is weak and has been weak for a long time. We keep repeating this story of our weakness. And I know talking about our weakness demoralizes us. It makes us feel hopeless, but it shouldn't make us feel hopeless. It should make us feel more determined. You can't say the left can come to power just like this. It doesn't work like that. You have to build the reservoirs of your strength. If you don't build your strength, you can't take the opportunity when it arises. The opportunity for revolution development has been there for a long time. We need to build our strength to take advantage of that opportunity. You see, in the world of the battle of ideas, you can't appeal to people unless you can show them not only that the current system is broken, but that we can imagine a better system. You see, I think now it's clear to a lot of people that the current system is broken. But they don't want to take a leap into the future because they are not confident that another system is possible. They still think that this system can be fixed somehow. Until you can demonstrate to people that there is another system, they will not leap with you. And the way you demonstrate it is by showing them in this world now that we are already building that kind of system. Now, for instance, it's very important, therefore, to teach people about what's happening in places like Vietnam, in Kerala, and so on, where COVID-19 did not kill so many people, where cooperatives, in the state of Kerala, state of 35 million people, 4.5 million women belong to a cooperative known as Kudumbushri. In this cooperative, they produce goods for society. You see, it's not just a cooperative to sell things. Most cooperatives in many parts of the world are cooperatives in the realm of circulation. They are cooperative shops. They buy things and they sell them. Free trade, fair trade, and so on. That's in the realm of circulation. These are production cooperatives. It's very much like what MST has as well. These, are production in a cooperative fashion for society, not for small groups of people. So these cooperatives are what Karl Marx called possible communism. You've got to look at these cooperatives, you've got to talk about them, you've got to explain to people that we can reconfigure society, we can reconfigure production around a different foundation, a foundation of cooperation rather than antagonism, a foundation not around money power, but around the cooperation of people. I mean, the non-commodified nature. Why is it necessary? Why is it necessary in the middle of a pandemic to give people money as relief? Why can't we just provide services, free food, free medicine, and so on? Why should we bring money in the middle of everything? I believe, for instance, more and more of human life should be without money. You should not have to pay for an education. You should not have to pay for healthcare. You should not have to pay to ride the train, the subway train in Sao Paulo. You should just get into the train and get off the train. There's no need for money to be exchanged there. This is a public service. It's paid for by our social wealth. So we need to show people that we are capable of organizing society based on the combined social work of people, which is already there. We already work socially. The problem right now is, and this is a definition of capitalism, it's social labor and private appropriation. What we would like is continue the social labor, but now constructed on a conscious foundation, an intentional foundation. We have social labor and social accumulation, not private accumulation. And that's the name for socialism. Socialism is the intentional construction of social labor for social accumulation. I think it's a very plausible utopia, and we need to talk about it with people, not as something utopic and impossible, but something as utopic and very possible and already available today.